The morning bell at St. Augustine's Prep wasn't so much a bell as it was a screech, a metallic cry that tore through the crowded hallways and signaled the start of another chaotic day. It was a sound that jolted everyone into motion, a starting pistol for a race of slamming lockers, shouted greetings, and the frantic shuffling of papers. For most students, it was the soundtrack to their lives, a noise as familiar as their own heartbeat. And in the middle of all this noise and energy, there was a pocket of absolute quiet. And her name was Sister Agnes. To the kids pouring into their first period classes, she was just there. Like the ancient oak tree in the courtyard or the collection of lost and found sweaters that had been piling up in the main office for years, Sister Agnes was a permanent fixture. She moved through the halls not against the current of students, but with a strange kind of immunity to it. The tide of teenagers seemed to part around her small, stooped figure, a natural, unspoken agreement to give her space. She was a woman made of soft edges and muted colors, forever hidden inside the deep black of her habit and the stark white of the wimple that framed her face. Her entire world seemed to be contained within that uniform. A world the students couldn't imagine and, frankly, didn't spend much time trying to. A group of seniors, loud and confident in their final year of high school, barely glanced her way as she shuffled past. The tall one, a basketball player whose height made him feel like he owned the hallways, was busy recounting a play from the game the night before. The girl with the dark, choppy hair and a guitar case slung over her back rolled her eyes at her friend's story, a cynical smirk playing on her lips. To them, Sister Agnes was just part of the scenery, a background character in the movie of their lives. They saw her every day, but they never really looked at her. If they had, they might have noticed the way her eyes, a pale, washed-out blue, missed nothing. They might have seen the stories etched into the fine lines around her mouth or the surprising strength in her gnarled, arthritic hands, but they didn't. They saw an old nun. They saw someone who smelled faintly of lavender and old books, someone whose voice was never louder than a soft murmur. They saw her as the enforcer of minor rules, the one who would gently tap a boy on the shoulder and remind him to tuck in his shirt, or quietly ask a girl to remove the bright pink nail polish that violated the dress code. Her requests were never demands, but they were always followed, not out of fear, but out of a strange, unspoken respect for her unwavering calm. She was like a human stop sign, a quiet interruption in their fast-paced world. One morning, the girl with the guitar, whose name was Maya, was leaning against her locker, arguing with a friend about a new song. She was frustrated, her voice a little too loud, her gestures sharp. "No, the bridge needs more feeling," she insisted. "It's too flat." As she spoke, she didn't notice Sister Agnes approaching until she was right beside her. The old nun didn't say a word about the noise. Instead, she reached out a wrinkled hand and gently straightened a crooked picture of the school's patron saint that was hanging on the wall next to Maya's head. Her fingers, though bent with age, moved with a delicate, precise grace. She adjusted the frame until it was perfectly level, a tiny, almost invisible act of order in the messy hallway. Then she turned to Maya and offered a small, gentle smile. "Good morning," she said, her voice soft as a whisper. "I hope you have a creative day." Maya was taken aback. She just nodded, mumbled a thanks, and watched as Sister Agnes continued her slow journey down the hall. The nun moved with a shuffling gait, her black rubber-soled shoes making no sound on the linoleum floor. She stopped for a moment to pick up a stray piece of paper, a crumpled math worksheet, and placed it neatly in the recycling bin. She then paused by a window, her gaze fixed on the bustling courtyard outside. She stood there for a long moment, a solitary, still figure in a sea of motion, a silent observer of the youthful energy that swirled around her. The basketball player, whose name was Alex, came up and slung an arm around Maya's shoulders. "What was that about?" he asked, nodding his head in the direction Sister Agnes had gone. Maya shrugged, shaking off the strange moment. "Nothing, just Sister Agnes being Sister Agnes." She turned back to her friend, her mind already returning to her music. But for a second, a flicker of a thought had passed through her mind. It was a question she had never considered before. What did Sister Agnes think about all day? What did she see when she looked out that window? Did she ever get bored? Did she ever remember being young? The thought was gone as quickly as it came, swallowed by the next bell and the rush to get to class. It was easier to see her as a symbol, as the old nun, than to see her as a person. It was easier to believe she had simply been born old, that she had arrived at St. Augustine's fully formed in her habit, and that she would remain there, a silent sentinel, long after they were all gone. They saw her piety as a lack of personality, her silence as a lack of opinion, and her gentle presence as a sign of weakness. They never once wondered about the life she lived before the habit, never imagined the passions she might have held, the dreams she might have chased, or the music that might have once played in her own heart. To them, she had simply always been there, a quiet, unassuming relic of a world they couldn't wait to leave behind. The weeks that followed the morning in the hallway were a blur of activity for the students of St. Augustine's, prep, the mundane rhythm of classes was broken by the buzz of anticipation. For the annual Fall Talent Show, it was the one event where the strict rules of the school seemed to loosen, where creativity could, for a few hours, take center stage. The auditorium, a dusty cavern usually reserved for boring assemblies, was transformed. It smelled of sawdust, hot lights, and the faint, sweet scent of hairspray. Backstage was a controlled chaos of tangled extension cords. Half-finished props and nervous energy, the tall basketball player, whose life was usually a symphony of squeaking sneakers and the roar of a crowd, was in his element here too. He was perfecting a routine that combined his dribbling skills with a few flashy slam dunks on a lowered hoop. He had music synced up, a heavy bass track that made the floor vibrate. He and his friends were loud, full of confidence, their laughter echoing off the concrete block walls. They saw the talent show as just another stage, another place to prove they were the best. The girl with the guitar, meanwhile, had found a quiet corner backstage, away from the noise. She sat on an old wooden crate, her guitar across her lap, her fingers picking out a complex, melancholic melody. Her song was a stark contrast to the basketball player's routine. It was dark, personal, and full of a quiet anger that she couldn't express in words. She believed her performance was the only one with any real artistic merit. The rest, in her cynical view, was just noise. She watched the other acts, a magic trick, a dance troupe, a bad comedy routine with a critical eye, mentally dismissing them one by one. On the night of the show, the energy was electric. The auditorium was packed with students, parents, and teachers. The stage lights were blinding, turning the air into a shimmering haze. The first few acts went by in a flash. There was applause, there was laughter, and the show was flowing perfectly. Backstage, the student council president, a serious-looking girl with a clipboard, was checking off names with a sense of immense relief. Everything was on schedule. Then, about halfway through the show, a hushed panic began to spread. The principal, Sister Mary James, a woman who usually radiated a calm and capable energy, was pacing nervously near the side of the stage. She had a phone pressed to her ear, her face growing paler with every passing second. The girl with the guitar noticed it first. She stopped tuning her instrument and watched the principal, a flicker of curiosity in her eyes. The basketball player, who was stretching his legs, saw it too. "What's up with her?" he muttered to a friend. Sister Mary James finally hung up the phone, letting out a long, shaky breath. She gathered the student council president and a few teachers around her. "That was the mother of the cellist from the chamber trio," she announced, her voice tight with stress. "All three of them have strep throat. A confirmed case. They can't perform." A collective groan went through the small group. The chamber trio wasn't the most popular act, but they were scheduled for a full 15 minutes, right before the intermission. 15 minutes, the student council president whispered, her eyes wide with horror. "What are we going to do? We can't just have a 15-minute gap. The audience will get restless. They'll start leaving." The principal wrung her hands, her mind racing. "Can we push the intermission up? Or maybe, can someone do 2 acts? The basketball player shook his head. "No way, my routine is set. I need the full stage and the music queued up perfectly." The guitarist just shrugged. I'm not going on twice. My song is a one-shot deal. The panic began to spread like a virus. Other performers started to look worried. The carefully constructed evening was threatening to fall apart. The air backstage, once filled with excited energy, was now thick with anxiety. The principal looked around at the faces of the students, seeing a mixture of fear and selfishness. No one wanted to help, no one wanted to take the risk. It was in that moment of chaos, when the noise of complaining and worrying was at its peak, that a quiet voice cut through it all. "Perhaps I could be of assistance," everyone turned. It was Sister Agnes. She had been standing quietly in the shadows, holding a tray of water cups for the performers. No one had even noticed her arrive. She stood there, a small, still figure in her black habit, her face a mask of serene calm amidst the storm of panic. The principal stared at her, bewildered. "Sister Agnes? I don't understand. There is a piano on stage, is there not?" Sister Agnes asked, her voice soft but clear. "I could play for a little while, to fill the time." For a moment there was a stunned silence. Then a snicker broke the quiet. It came from the basketball player. He looked at his friends, a huge, mocking grin spreading across his face. The girl with the guitar felt a similar sense of absurdity bubble up inside her. She couldn't help herself. "Play what?" she muttered, just loud enough for those around her to hear. "Amazing Grace?" A few other students chuckled. The idea was ridiculous. The old nun, the one who told them to be quiet in the hallways, the one who smelled like lavender and old books, was going to perform. What could she possibly play that would hold the attention of a gymnasium full of teenagers for 15 minutes? It was a joke. It was going to be a disaster. But Sister Mary James was desperate. She looked at Sister Inez's calm, confident face. There was no hint of a joke in her eyes, only a quiet sincerity. The principal had known Sister Agnes for years. She knew she was not a woman who offered things lightly. She was a woman of deep faith and surprising strengths. And right now, she was the only one offering a solution. "Are you sure, sister?" the principal asked, her voice filled with a mix of doubt and desperation. Sister Agnes simply nodded. "I am sure, Mary James. It would be my pleasure." The principal let out a long breath and made a decision. "Okay," she said, turning to the student council president. "Put her on the list. We have nothing to lose." The news spread quickly through the backstage crowd. The basketball player was practically in tears from laughing so hard. "Dude, this is going to be the best part of the night," he wheezed. "I'm recording this." The guitarist just shook her head, a cynical smile on her lips. She felt a little sorry for the old woman, who clearly had no idea what she was getting into. She was about to be humiliated in front of the entire school. It was a terrible idea, but it was also going to be incredibly entertaining to watch. They all settled in, ready for the train wreck, completely unaware that they were about to witness something that would change the way they saw the world. And one quiet, unassuming nun forever. The announcer's voice echoed through the gymnasium, a little too loud and a little too enthusiastic. "And now, to fill our short intermission, we have a very special performance from Sister Agnes." A few polite claps came from the teachers and parents, but from the student section there was a wave of giggles and whispers. The tall basketball player nudged his friend, a huge, stupid grin on his face. He held up his phone, already recording. "This is gonna be gold," he whispered, his words full of cruel anticipation. The girl with the guitar just shook her head, a small, pitying smile on her lips. She was leaning against the back wall of the auditorium, arms crossed, ready to witness the gentle car crash. From the side of the stage, a small figure emerged. Sister Agnes walked into the blinding spotlights, her black habit absorbing the light, making her look like a silhouette cut from midnight. The slow, shuffling walk they were all used to seeing in the hallways now seemed agonizingly long. Each step was a small, soft scuff on the polished wooden stage. The audience grew restless. A few people started talking loudly, their voices carrying in the large room. Someone shouted, "Play us a song," followed by a burst of laughter. Sister Agnes didn't react. She kept her eyes forward, her face a calm. Unreadable mask, she reached the grand piano, a massive, gleaming beast of black wood and white ivory that sat center stage. It looked too big for her, like a throne for a king she was about to awkwardly climb into. She didn't sit down right away. Instead, she ran a hand gently over the smooth, curved lid of the piano, a gesture of familiarity and respect. Then she adjusted the wooden bench, pulling it out with a slow, deliberate scrape before sitting down. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't nervous. She was preparing. The basketball player zoomed in his phone, focusing on her wrinkled hands as she placed them on the keys. "Look at those things," he muttered to his friend. "She can barely even hold a pen." The girl with the guitar watched, her arms still crossed. But a tiny flicker of something, maybe curiosity, pricked at her cynicism. The way Sister Agnes held her hands, poised just above the keys, wasn't the hesitant gesture of an amateur. It was the posture of someone who knew exactly what they were about to do. The old nun took a deep breath, her shoulders rising and falling beneath the heavy black cloth. The auditorium was still loud, a low hum of teenage impatience and disrespect. Then her fingers touched the keys. The first notes that rang out were not a simple hymn. They were not a tired, old tune everyone knew. The sound that exploded from the piano was like a thunderstorm trapped inside wood and wire. It was a cascade of complex, thunderous chords so rich and powerful that they seemed to physically push the air out of the room. The low hum of the audience vanished instantly, as if a switch had been flipped. Every head turned toward the stage. Every conversation died. The music was ferocious, technically brilliant, and filled with a raw, breathtaking passion that seemed impossible coming from the small, stooped woman. It was a piece by Rachmaninoff, a name most of the students didn't know, but they didn't need to. They could feel it. The notes were sharp and clear, like tiny shards of glass, followed by deep, rumbling chords that you felt in your chest. The basketball player's phone, which he had been holding so steady, began to slip from his numb fingers. He didn't notice. His grin was gone, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated shock. His mouth was slightly open. The cocky, confident athlete who thought he knew what power was witnessing a different kind of strength. A force of nature that had nothing to do with muscles or height. On stage, Sister Agnes was transformed. The old nun had vanished. Her back, usually stooped with age, was now straight, her posture rigid with concentration. Her head was bent, her eyes closed, her entire being focused on the instrument in front of her. Her hands, which had looked so weak and gnarled just moments before, were no longer arthritic. They were a blur of motion, flying across the keys with an impossible speed and grace. Her fingers, bent and wrinkled, seemed to have a life of their own, dancing, leaping, and striking the ivories with a precision that was breathtaking. She wasn't just playing the piano. She was channeling something through it, a storm of emotion, a lifetime of joy and sorrow, all pouring out into the silent, darkened gymnasium. The girl with the guitar felt her breath catch in her throat. Her cynical smirk had melted away, replaced by a look of utter awe. She considered herself an artist. She poured her feelings into her music, her dark, brooding songs. But this was something else entirely. This was a depth of emotion she couldn't even comprehend. The music swelled, rising and falling like a great, angry sea. It was angry, then it was sad, then it was so beautiful it hurt to listen to. She felt a wave of shame wash over her. Her own songs, which she had been so proud of, suddenly felt small, hollow, and childish. She was a student scribbling in a notebook, and the woman on stage was a master poet writing with fire and lightning. She sank down to the floor, her back against the wall, and just listened. Her guitar case forgotten beside her. The gymnasium was no longer a gymnasium. It was a grand concert hall in Vienna, a cathedral of sound. The hot stage lights, the squeaky basketball hoops, the banners hanging from the ceiling, it all disappeared. There was only the music and the woman making it. The most disruptive kids in the school, the ones who never sat still in class, were leaning forward in their seats, completely captivated. The basketball player had finally let his phone drop to the floor with a soft thud. He was no longer seeing a joke. He was seeing a master at work, and he was humbled. the piece reached its climax. A furious, breathtaking storm of notes that filled every corner of the room. The sound was so immense, so overwhelming, that it felt like it might bring the roof down. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The final, resonant chord hung in the air, vibrating through the stunned silence for what felt like an eternity. No one moved. No one breathed. It was a sacred, heavy silence, more powerful than any applause could ever be. Then, Sister Agnes blinked, as if waking from a long, deep dream. The ferocity in her eyes softened, replaced by her familiar, gentle expression. She looked out at the sea of silent, staring faces, a small, almost confused look on her face, as if she was surprised to see them all there. She slowly lifted her hands from the keys and placed them in her lap. She stood up from the bench, her body once again becoming small, and stooped. She gave a small, shy bow to the audience, and then turned and shuffled off the stage the same way she had come on, quietly and humbly, disappearing into the shadows. The thunderstorm was over, and the quiet, gentle rain had returned. The final chord didn't just end. It dissolved. It hung in the air of the gymnasium like a thick, heavy fog, a vibration that seemed to settle in the bones of every person sitting in the darkened room. For a full 5 seconds, there was absolute silence. It wasn't the quiet of an audience waiting for the next note. It was the silence of 1,000 people who had collectively forgotten how to breathe. The only sounds were the faint hum of the stage lights and the distant, muffled sound of a car passing by outside. A noise from a world that suddenly felt 1,000,000 miles away. In that silence, the basketball player stared at the empty piano bench. His phone lay on the floor, forgotten, its screen dark. The smirk, the confidence, the entire persona he had built for himself had been wiped clean, leaving behind a raw, unfiltered sense of awe. He felt small, not in a bad way, but in the way you feel when you stand at the edge of the Grand Canyon or look up at a sky full of stars. He was witnessing something immense, something far beyond his understanding. He looked at his own hands, large and powerful, hands that could palm a basketball and dunk it through a hoop. He thought about the hands of that small, old woman, hands that looked as fragile as dried leaves, and how they had just commanded a storm. He felt a hot flush of shame creep up his neck. He remembered his laughter, his cruel jokes, and they felt like the most foolish things he had ever done in his life. The girl with the guitar was still on the floor, her back against the wall. Her guitar case was leaning against her leg, but she hadn't touched it. She felt like she had been turned inside out. The music she had just heard wasn't just a performance. It was a language she didn't speak, a story she couldn't read but felt in her soul. All her own songs, the ones she poured her heart into, the ones she thought were so deep and meaningful, now felt like nursery rhymes. The anger and cynicism she wore like armor felt thin and cheap. She had always thought of herself as an artist, but the woman on that stage was something else entirely. She was a force of nature. The guitarist felt a single, hot tear roll down her cheek, and she quickly wiped it away, embarrassed by her own emotional reaction. Then a single person began to clap. It was an older man, a history teacher, sitting in the front row. His clap was slow, deliberate, full of respect. Another person joined in, then another. It started as a ripple, a scattered sound of appreciation. But then the basketball player, still in a daze, started to clap. His hands came together with a loud, solid smack. His friends, seeing him, joined in. The girl with the guitar pushed herself up from the floor and began to clap too. Within moments, the ripple became a wave. The entire gymnasium erupted. It wasn't just polite applause. It was a thunderous, deafening roar. People were on their feet, stomping, whistling, shouting, "Bravo!" It was the kind of ovation reserved for rock stars, for heroes returning home. It was a release of all the tension, all the shock, all the pure, unadulterated wonder they had just experienced. On stage, in the wings, Sister Agnes stood frozen, her eyes wide with a look of complete bewilderment. She watched as the sea of students rose to their feet, their faces illuminated by the stage lights, their expressions a mixture of shock and joy. She seemed to shrink back from the sound as if it were a physical force pushing against her. The ferocity, the passion, the power that had possessed her just moments before was gone. In its place was the quiet, humble nun they all knew, looking utterly lost in the face of such a raw, human outpouring of emotion. She gave a small, awkward bow, her hands clasped in front of her, and then shuffled quickly off the stage, disappearing into the darkness backstage as if she were fleeing a fire. The rest of the talent show felt like an afterthought. The basketball player went through his routine, but his heart wasn't in it. The dunks were still impressive, the tricks still skillful, but they felt hollow now, like a cheap magic trick after witnessing a real miracle. When he finished, the applause was polite, but it couldn't compare to what had come before. He felt a strange sense of disappointment, not in the audience's reaction, but in himself. He walked off the stage feeling like a child who had just shown off a toy. The girl with the guitar was the last performer before the intermission. As she walked onto the stage, she felt the weight of 1,000 eyes on her. She looked out at the audience, then at the empty piano bench. She took a deep breath, sat down on the stool she had brought, and placed her guitar in her lap. She didn't play her cynical, angry song. Instead, she played a simple melody, something soft and honest. Her voice, when she began to sing, was a little shaky, but it was filled with a new emotion, a vulnerability she had never shown before. She wasn't trying to impress anyone anymore. She was just trying to communicate. When she finished, the applause was warm and genuine. She looked out and saw the basketball player in the front row, and he gave her a small, respectful nod. She nodded back, a silent understanding passing between them. In the days that followed, Sister Agnes became a new kind of legend at St. Augustine's. The whispers in the hallways were no longer about her being out of touch, but about her secret past. The story of her performance grew with each telling, becoming more mythical, more incredible. I heard she used to play for the president. My dad said she was offered $1 million to go on tour, but she turned it down. They say she can play any song you can name perfectly, after hearing it just once. But the most significant change was in the way people treated her. The students no longer saw her as a background character. They saw her. When she walked down the hall, the tide of teenagers still parted for her, but now it was out of a deep, unspoken respect. They would watch her go by with a kind of reverence, their faces full of wonder. The basketball player made a point of holding the door open for her whenever he saw her approaching. He would say, "Good morning, sister," his voice quiet and sincere. One afternoon, he saw her struggling to carry a stack of books, and he rushed over to help her without a second thought. She just smiled her gentle smile and thanked him, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. The guitarist, too, found herself changed. She started listening to different kinds of music, searching for the passion she had heard that night. She would practice for hours, not to show off but to understand, to try and unlock even a fraction of the feeling Sister Agnes had poured into the piano. She watched the old nun from a distance, trying to reconcile the quiet, shuffling woman with the thunderous virtuoso on the stage. She saw her picking up trash in the courtyard, smiling at a crying first grader, patiently explaining a math problem to a struggling student. She saw that the same passion, the same intensity was there in all those small, quiet acts. It was just a different kind of music. The guitarist knew she had to talk to her, not as a curious student, but as one artist to another. She was waiting for the right moment, the courage to approach the woman who had shown her that the most extraordinary music doesn't always come from the loudest instrument. The days after the talent show felt different at St. Augustine's Prep. The air itself seemed to have changed, charged with a new kind of energy. It wasn't the usual buzz of teenage drama or the stress of upcoming exams. It was a quiet, humming current of wonder. And at the center of it all was Sister Agnes. She moved through the hallways just as she always had, with her slow, shuffling gait and her hands clasped in quiet prayer. But now the tide of students didn't just part around her. It stopped. They would watch her go by, their faces filled with a mixture of awe and disbelief, as if they were trying to solve a puzzle. The whispers that followed her were no longer about the rules she enforced or the quiet life she led. They were about the storm she had unleashed from the grand piano. The stories grew with each telling, becoming more fantastical and grand. I heard she was the youngest person ever to perform at Carnegie Hall. One student would say to another in hushed tones before class. My older brother told me she has a room full of gold records from when she was a famous rock star, but she's not allowed to show anyone, another would claim. The basketball player, who had once laughed at the idea of her performing, now found himself defending her. You guys don't get it, he told his friends in the locker room. It wasn't just playing. It was like she was speaking a different language, a language everyone understood. He had started holding doors for her, not just out of politeness, but with a genuine sense of respect. He would stand there, holding the heavy wooden door open, and as she passed, he would ask, "Are you going to play the piano today, sister?" He never expected her to say yes. It was just his way of acknowledging the other side of her, the side he and everyone else had been so blind to. She would just smile her gentle smile and say, "Not today, my son. But it is kind of you to ask." These small interactions became a new ritual, a quiet acknowledgement of the secret they now all shared. The girl with the guitar felt the change most deeply. The performance had shattered something inside her, and she was slowly trying to piece herself back together in a new shape. Her own music, which she had once guarded so fiercely, now felt immature. She would sit in her room, trying to write, but the cynical, angry melodies wouldn't come. Instead, she found herself playing simple, haunting chords, trying to capture a fraction of the emotions she had witnessed. She knew the rumors were just that, rumors. She felt a pull, a need to understand the truth behind the music. She wanted to know not about the fictional rock star or the Carnegie Hall prodigy, but about the real woman who lived a life of quiet service and held a universe of passion inside her. One afternoon, a week after the show, she found her courage. She saw Sister Agnes sitting alone in the school's small music room, the late afternoon sun streaming through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The old nun was just sitting on a bench, not at the piano, but just looking out the window, her hands resting peacefully in her lap. The guitarist took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest, and walked in. Sister Agnes looked up, her pale blue eyes welcoming. "Hello," she said softly. "Come to practice?" The girl shook her head, clutching the strap of her guitar case like a shield. "No, sister," she said, her voice barely a whisper. I wanted to talk. About the other night." Sister Agnes nodded slowly, a knowing look in her eyes. She patted the empty space on the bench beside her. The girl sat down, leaving a respectful distance between them. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the distant shouts from the sports field outside. "It was beautiful," the girl finally said, the words feeling inadequate. "I've never heard anything like it." "Thank you," Sister Agnes replied simply. "It has been a long time since I have played for an audience that large." The girl took the opening. "The kids are saying all sorts of things," she said carefully. "That you were famous, that you played all over the world. I don't care about the rumors. I want to know the real story. If you want to tell me." Sister Agnes was quiet for a long time, her gaze returning to the window. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but clear like a bell in the distance. "The stories are never as exciting as people imagine," she began. "But yes, there is some truth to them. When I was very young, before I came here, I did play. I played a lot. I loved it more than anything." A faint, faraway smile touched her lips. "I loved the feeling of the keys under my fingers, the way a whole room full of people could hold their breath, all listening to the same notes. I love the applause, I won't lie. It feels good to be appreciated." She turned to look at the girl, her eyes filled with a gentle honesty. "I traveled. I played in small halls and big theaters. I was offered opportunities, scholarships to wonderful schools. For a while, I thought that was my life. I thought my purpose was to be on a stage, to share my music with as many people as possible. So what happened?" the girl asked, leaning forward, completely captivated. "I found a different kind of music," Sister Agnes said, her voice dropping even lower. "It's a quiet music. You don't hear it with your ears, not really. You hear it with your heart. It's the music of a child finally understanding a math problem. It's the music of someone who is lonely finding a friend. It's the music of a quiet moment of peace in a busy, noisy world. She paused, looking around the small music room. I realized that my music didn't have to be for 1,000 people in a concert hall. It could be for one person, or even for no one but myself and God. I didn't see it as giving up my talent. I saw it as dedicating it to a different audience. A quieter one? The guitarist sat in stunned silence. She thought about her own desire for recognition, for people to hear her songs and think she was brilliant. She had always seen music as a way to get something, to prove something. Sister Agnes saw it as a way to give something. "Doesn't you miss it?" the girl asked. "The stage? The applause?" "Sometimes," Sister Agnes admitted with a small shrug. "But then I see one of you succeed, or I see two students who were arguing become friends again, and I hear that quiet music. And it's more beautiful than any applause I have ever received." From that day on, the guitarist started visiting Sister Agnes after school. At first they would just talk. Then one day, Sister Agnes invited her to bring her guitar. They would play together, the old nun on the piano and the young girl on her guitar. It wasn't a formal lesson, not really. Sister Agnes didn't teach her scales or music theory. She taught her about feeling, about patience, about finding the music in silence. The girl learned more about humility and art in those quiet afternoons than she had in all her years of trying to be a cool, cynical musician. Her own songs began to change, losing their anger and gaining a depth, a warmth that they had never had before. Sister Agnes was still the same woman. She still wore the black habit and smelled of lavender and old books. She still told students to tuck in their shirts and spoke in a soft, gentle voice. But to the students of St. Augustine's, she was no longer just an old nun. She was Sister Agnes, the pianist, the keeper of thunderstorms, the living testament to the idea that the most extraordinary stories and the most beautiful music are often hidden in the plainest sight, waiting for the world to be quiet enough to finally hear them.